All right, welcome back to the In My Beach Boys Room podcast. I'm Adam Schreiner here with Matthew Hartz, and we are going to talk about 1975. 1974 and 75. No musical analysis this time because this is kind of a different time period. They didn't really release new music.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Okay.
There'll be a tiny bit in here.
Okay. And so I didn't have any homework this time. I didn't listen to any music because this is all music from the early time or their early years.
Well,
right?
there's just some compilations, and some of the compilations are the early hits, and it's all already released music.
Okay, so we'll get into that. Let's do our social media. You can find Matthew Hartz on Facebook. That's where he will post the covers that he does, and then Twitter is Matthew_Hartz. Instagram, Matthew Hartz Music, MatthewHartzMusic.com, and then on YouTube you can search Matthew Hartz Music and check out his channel, subscribe, do all those things that help us, give us a little favorite, on whatever podcast platform that you're using. It really helps us out. So let's go ahead and I guess get started. I know really nothing about what you're about to tell me, so hopefully I won't derail you too much with my questions, but I'm sure I'm going to have some along the way here. So
it's really going to be one of my favorite episodes, I think. It's been fun to think about. One thing I want to say in the beginning, I have another correction. You know how we started this season with me saying, hey, I had a couple things I got wrong?
Yeah.
Well, I talked about the history of Carl and the Rickenbacker guitars that he had, and I've decided that since I made that correction, I know even less about really the history of the Rickenbackers that were used from 64 to 66, because there were different models used. I've been coming across pictures and going, you know what? I need to tell folks that I'm going to keep my mouth shut about the Rickenbackers and which model was used when and everything. But anyway, I just wanted to say that's kind of funny.
Do you remember what you had said?
Oh, I'm sure that some of what I said, it was valid,
accurate, right? Yeah.
But then when I look at the tour that they did in Japan while Brian was working on Pet Sounds, Carl was back to using something that looked more like the Rick that he was using earlier than the one that he was using. It's blah blah blah. So I thought, you know what, just put it out there. There you go.
Okay, done deal.
The other thing I wanted to say before we get into the episode proper is that, hey, last year when we started this, we were going off, hey, Surfin' was released in 1961. This is 60 years of the Beach Boys. But the 50th anniversary, they pretty much coincide that with 62 and the release of the Surfin' Safari album and the first big singles and all that other. So the Beach Boys finally have released. There's a press release on Brian's site, and I'm sure it's other places too, but they're basically touting the 60th celebration, which starts in June with a repackage of here we are talking about repackages today, but this I think it was 2003, Capitol put out a compilation called Sounds of Summer that has just skyrocketed. I mean, platinum several times over, maybe 4 or 5 times, and huge sales. And so this year they're going to repackage that repackage, which originally I think only had 30 tunes. The deluxe version is going to have 80 on it with 24 new mixes. There's not going to be any new music, so it's going to, and then a lot of just sonic enhancement type stuff, I'm already here, and all of the packaging is really neat. So I'm gonna have to have both the LP and the CD version.
And you think this is partially because of the success
that's what they're saying.
Success of Phil Flows, or
the other box sets also
are just doing so well, right?
Right, but this is probably, since they always do something special right at summer. Brian's birthday is June 20th, so it's always right at the beginning of summer, right? And so they're cool. Yeah, they're always doing something they're doing something special for the 60th, and that's coming out on June 17th. So I'm excited about that. I watched the unboxing on YouTube yesterday, and then also the official announcement in that same press release is that they are coming out with the box set to cover Carl and the Passions in Holland, and I'm hoping a lot of spring stuff in the fall. So I'm very excited about that personally.
But we were kind of, like you said, in the last year when we were doing this, we kept saying, happy 60th, happy 60th, the Beach Boys. But now we're actually seeing it this year. Is what you're saying.
And that's in line with the 50th anniversary. They did it in 2012 as opposed to 2011.
Got it.
And so I should have known, that's when they'll celebrate it.
Well, but anyway, we'll start throwing that happy 60th at the end, because we got to keep that going. So.
Oh, absolutely. So we get into this period, 1974 and 75, and you say that you don't have any idea of what I'm going to talk about.
I mean, so the I guess even before that, so the last thing we talked about, end of 70, can you just recap for me? End of 73, what's going on?
Well, you had the In Concert album.
And that came out, and it reminded me that was November?
Yeah, okay. right in there. It's the last part of the year.
Okay, cool.
And it went gold for Warner, so that had, we're on a steady momentum thing with, starting with Jack Riley and the, Surf's Up and going on up Carl and the Passions in Holland and all of this stuff, the In Concert album. Then that's another thing is that Riley was let go as the manager and Mike's brother Steve Love came in, right?
Sure.
And Blondie left the group.
Yep, so, awesome. Okay.
So there we go.
Back up to speed.
The most interesting thing about 74 and 75 is without any new music, and I'm going to put an asterisk on new because there is one single that is released in the end of 74, but it's kind of almost pointless. But we'll talk about it when I get there. But without any new music being released in over a couple years, it's like almost 3 years before they get some new studio recordings going. This is the most pivotal moment in Beach Boy history. This is where they become legendary because of the landmark compilation albums that come out during this time and reissues of some of their early material. There's a plethora of it, and it came at a magic moment for them. And then, like I said before, this is where the Beach Boys became legendary.
Crazy. That's crazy that happens during a compilation type period.
Yeah, well, it's and also they had huge concert tours during this period as a result of the success of some of these compilations and all that. So it's and we'll talk about each compilation kind of separately because they had slightly different impacts and everything. But early in 1974, they started working with a man named Jim Guercio, who was working with Chicago and Blood, Sweat, and Tears, another 70s supergroup. And I'm not sure, I think he got connected with Carl and Dennis somehow, but he came into the fold and he ended up being a part-time manager for the Beach Boys. He would play bass with them sometimes live a lot in 74 and 75 because he just loved it. Mm-hmm. And then he had a studio in Colorado called Caribou. It was the label was the Caribou label, and I think that's what they call the studio too. But the Beach Boys also went there in 74 later on in the year with Brian to try to get some new material going. So this Jimmy Guercio, he's a big part of what's going on with the next couple of years and what the Beach Boys would do touring wise and such anyway. This is also right now is in the middle of Brian's super reclusive / bedroom period. Right.
And this has been going on for about how long now?
When they got back from He started, I mean, all of the early 70s, he's been exhibiting some different behaviors and depression and, institutionalized in the late 60s for the first time.
Right.
I should say going to the hospital.
But the real,
when
withdrawal was...
Yeah. I remember Murray dies in 1973, and so this is kind of the heart of what people would consider that bedroom period where he's not very active at all. One famous story from this time is Paul McCartney and his wife Linda went to visit him during this time, and they knocked on his bedroom door, and he wouldn't even come out. They could hear him in there crying.
Oh, geez.
And they ended up just leaving without talking to him, So that's, kind of the severity of where things, where Paul McCartney comes to visit, you don't even open the door.
Yeah, that's pretty severe.
But so there's a little bit of where Brian's at, right? The previous year in 1973, a movie came out called American Graffiti. Have you ever heard of that?
I have heard of that, yeah.
Okay, George Lucas was who went on to do Star Wars all that. And Francis Ford Coppola was also involved with it, who did the Godfather movies. So these are guys that are hot, right? And so they put out this movie that was really, really popular, and the Beach Boys songs, there were Beach Boy songs featured in the film, along with other early 60s, late 50s type music. And because America was going through that period where we'd just gotten out of the Vietnam War, had all the stuff going on with Nixon, there was a yearning to get back to this nostalgia that Bruce started talking about with Disney Girls in 71. It's just like people in America were yearning for a time when things were simpler, and the drive-ins and the sock hops and it was not just the Beach Boys that experienced a resurgence, but there were other people too. Well, the film, I know it used Surfin' Safari and Shutdown, but over the ending credits, they used the song All Summer Long, which is funny because the movie is set in 1962, and All Summer Long wasn't recorded till 1964. That was always kind of weird for me. But so a lot of people were like, just because of the film, they're remembering the Beach Boys' early stuff.
Sure, yeah.
Capitol, who they have ceased to have a relationship with since 1969, they own all of the music pre-Pet Sounds. So everything from 62 to 65, and this is important. They want to capitalize on this somehow, and so they get together with Mike to consult with him, and I'm really glad that happened, because he came up with some good ideas. They'd already had best of compilations and all kinds of repackages, and he was like going, let's don't go with 20 golden greats or 20 moldy oldies again, or so. Let's think of something. And so he came up with Endless Summer, to just a feeling almost, and people were feeling this. And then, the artwork, and we'll get into that a little bit later too. It was really almost kind of ambiguous and almost more of a feeling than an actual picture representation of the Beach Boys anyway, And so Capitol had the rights to the stuff pre-Pet Sounds. So the only thing that is on Endless Summer, there's not a song from Pet Sounds on. Everything's 62 to 65, right? So all the early surf and car hits, plus some of the great stuff from 65. The thing goes number one.
And this was what? How early?
June in 74, and it went number one, and it stayed on the charts for 3 years.
Wow.
It was that.
So as a compilation, as a record, is that was pretty unheard of, or as a compilation that was unheard of? Like what?
Oh, it was just unheard of for anything
so
to be that on
for
that
long.
Oh yeah, that time
okay.
especially. It was the news of the industry.
Wow.
Back in the mid 70s. I mean, it was and it was all of a sudden the cool kids that, I hear analogies or stories like this all the time, but the kids that were buying their Eagles records and Fleetwood Mac and everything like that, all of a sudden it was cool to have Endless Summer with that too. Whereas, but it might not have been cool in 71 if your friends caught you with a copy of Surf's Up because the Beach Boys weren't hip again yet. But all of a sudden it became very hip to like and even like the Beach Boys super old stuff.
Right.
Okay, and I remember, and I was 5 in 74, but it was heavily advertised on TV, and it was probably one of the first records to have that done to it. As you can go to YouTube and look up the Endless Summer TV commercial, and I was amazed when I finally saw it a couple years ago. Ah, boy, there's a blast from it. I remember that. That was on, so heavily rotated and like on TV several times a day. Endless Summer is great that it revitalized the band and made them legendary. It's not so great in that there's a shift at this time with the band where they quit kind of playing the new hip music that they were playing all during the early 70s, because now the old stuff has become so popular because of Endless Summer that they have to start cramming the shows, just all and so now they're kind of bummed, especially Carl and Dennis. Hey, we were getting Long Promised Road and Feel, the only with, all the songs off the early 70s album all of a sudden just kind of got cut aside. And nobody, people started forgetting about those songs big time, and so it was very frustrating.
And, maybe that's a reason why like people like me didn't, we just, we associate Beach Boys with the stuff from these albums. And,
it's so funny because the note just says, this is the big reason people only associate the Beach Boys with the early stuff, is because their biggest, at that time, Sounds of Summer has surpassed it, but as far as a phenomenon, this compilation, Endless Summer, was the thing. And that's why most people know them for only just the first 2 or 3 years of their career.
Yeah, because they go 70, 71, 72, 73, making these kind of new...
even Pet Sounds and Smiley Smile and Wild Honey and French People did...
before that.
Yeah,
so
all that.
And
so all that gets erased pretty much.
Wow.
It's for the general public.
Right, right. And
Capitol didn't make those albums available. They kind of deleted the catalog, too, as almost a retribution thing because of them going their separate ways in 69, and so it became really hard to get old Beach Boys material.
No, it makes total sense. Even my buddy who's, closer to your age, after I got obsessed with Sunflower, and I know he was a Beach Boys fan, and I told him to check it out, and he's like, well, how have I not heard this? That same sort of sentiment. And so now that this is kind of making sense to me in the sense of why the story of the Beach Boys is how it is.
Yeah.
And why people only know certain music. Wow, it's kind of like a little missing piece of the puzzle for me here.
Well, and the Feel Flow set was such and how well it did is just a godsend for because that was, people got to know huge big time when that was released last year of like, oh my God, and Capitol did it upright and put billboards in Los Angeles, advertising it, and finally that music has been marketed correctly and is going to reach a whole new audience of people, right?
Exactly.
So anyway, it is huge. I'm gonna grab my original copy of Endless Summer. I've got several of them here because this original one is not the best. It's got electrical tape on it and me and my brother John's name all over it. But I got this for Christmas when I was 5 years old. So you know what? My parents kind of determined when I would get records back in the day. People say, why didn't you get it in June? Well, first of all, I don't know if I really knew it was available. I just saw it on TV, and I knew I was getting it for Christmas, and I still remember where the stereo was in the living room, and I still remember opening this and looking at this for the first time, and being bewildered, so young, with the beards and these pictures, immediately you start going to, what is this, but the artwork is so iconic and attached to the whole project that it will forever just be a huge thing in my mind, just even the cover of this album.
Right. And it is it's an interesting cover. It's the art is very actually kind of 70s,
Yeah, a man
style.
named Keith McConnell did it, and he did for Spirit of America the next year, and then Sunshine Dream later on in the 80s, and he had a different feel for each one of them, but it's I like the fact that it's cohesive through those compilations, but it's it's just hard to explain to me. That picture that we had of John hanging off Dad's crutches and me having the concert album that you kind of retouched.
Yeah.
This is right about that period. And so really this is 5 years old. I mean, this is really everything's kind of coming together in my mind, and trying to put the pieces together the best I can. But I put on Endless Summer last night to listen to it in its sequence, and immediately when I start doing that, I mean immediately it goes back to me being that age. And I remember I was at Surf and Safari when I put it on last night, and Carl's guitar solo, I still remember the vividness of hearing that guitar come out of the speakers when I was just a lot of root or core feelings coming out of me just attached to this thing. And so I guess we could go on forever about that, but this continues to be part of the story. That was in June. In July, Warner's, the new company, they put out Wild Honey, and it's also got 2020 on it. Okay, so these are Warner's was looking at this, what Capitol's doing,
well
and said, wait, and they owned the albums after that, and so I got that probably not that year, but that was how I first heard Wild Honey in 2020 was on that compilation, and that went to number 50.
Wow. And that's the exact same. It's just a re-release of Wild Honey.
Yes, those are double albums. That's Wild Honey in 2020, and this one's Friends and Smiley Smile. It's weird because they put them a little bit out of order from what they were released in, but it's still. And the other one didn't do as well as the other. It only went like 125. But the thing is these things were out there and people were, not only are they repackaging the early stuff, we're starting to hear the late 60s albums for the first times. A lot of people hadn't heard them, and so it's like a flood of old Beach Boy material.
Was that the artwork on those is very similar? Was that, did you buy those? Do you buy those separately or are those together? Did they come together?
There are two different ones. This one has Wild Honey on one record, and then the second record is 2020. And this one is Friends and Smiley Smile.
Right.
The four late 60s albums after Pet Sounds.
Got it.
And so they both did really well, but that's where I first heard Wild Honey in 2020. Touring wise, right about this time I think in June, they start to tour with Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young, and they're a supporting act. Okay, so CSN and Y are the headliners, but this is all happening when Endless Summer is taking off, and it's kind of weird because it's going number one, and pretty soon the Beach Boys are going to be doing all the headlining.
Right.
But they're a supporting act on this tour while they're going out, while they're going, stratospheric.
Right.
So in the fall of 74, I mentioned Jimmy Garcio and the Caribou Recording Studios in Colorado. The Beach Boys go up there with Brian. They start several tunes, including It's Okay, which would show up on 1976 15 Big Ones, and then also Good Timin', which ends up showing up on 79's LA Light album. And they did some other stuff there too, but they just kind of barely got it going. They didn't release any of it, but it was significant in that they got Brian to go there and do a little bit of work. But I think he was only there a couple of days, and I think some of them were eating dinner or something like that, and up shows Brian. He's got his suitcases, and he goes, "Okay, I'm ready to go home. Just take me to the airport.
I'm done."
All right, I think that was when that was, and also around this time because Garcio managed Chicago. They were planning a huge tour with Chicago for, I think, 75 sometime. But also Carl and Dennis and Al go in to record backing vocals on the Chicago song "Wishing You Were Here," which was a big hit in the 70s because of that. And Carl had sung on, or there had been Beach Boys on Elton John recordings, and so they're not just getting their stuff re-released and having this resurgence, but they're also being included on these
they're doing a lot of collaborations as well, right?
Really popular groups and artists, and are asking the Beach Boys to participate in their stuff,
right,
because they're so hot. Another thing in 74, I think this is late in the year, but Ricky, the second of the new members, Blondie left in 73, but Ricky leaves in 1974 to go play with Joe Walsh, who was with the Eagles, and he was going to do his own group, and so he asked Ricky to do that, and Ricky asked Carl if he'd let him go to be able to do that. And so that happens, and so Dennis starts playing the drums again on stage.
Oh, okay.
And then in December, we finally get to, November 23rd, I was looking up this morning, Brian wrote a new little song called "Child of Winter" that was supposed to be a Christmas song, and he wrote it with Stephen Kalinick, who he's been in the picture with all three Wilson brothers since the late 60s, but it's a silly little song. They record it on November 23rd, or I think the really odd thing is they release it on December 23rd, and it's supposed to be a Christmas release. Now, usually you're doing Christmas releases in like late October.
Yeah.
So it's like, and people can look up the song. It's kind of fun, but it's a real simple little ditty that's, to me, it's almost inconsequential.
Oh, okay.
That's why I kind of said they didn't release any new music.
But except with the little, this is the asterisk.
Yeah, they released a little Christmas tune 2 days before Christmas that didn't have a shot of hitting the Christmas market.
Yeah.
But there you go. So New Year's Eve, and I think this is the end of 74, the beginning of 75. I remember this vividly. My folks went to a New Year's party someplace, and we had a babysitter. I don't know if Molly was born yet, but John and I had a babysitter. They instructed our babysitter to please get Matthew up at like 11:30 or something like that, because the Beach Boys are going to be on TV at midnight tonight. And so I still remember getting, woken up by the bed and rubbing my eyes and walking down the stairs and turn the TV on. And my early visuals were only my mom's first albums at that point. I guess I'd gotten Endless Summer just a few days before that, right? Mm-hmm. But here I look at, they said, there's the Beach Boys, and they all got beards, and I'd never seen any of that, it just, I did believe that it was the Beach Boys. It was just really unsettling.
Threw you off a little bit, huh?
Oh yeah, but I remember seeing them. And what I was watching was the Dick Clark's Rockin' New Year's Eve special that people can go out on YouTube and see. And it was the Beach Boys, and they were all in these blue, almost. They were sailing out. They looked like captains of a ship. They had blue blazers and white pants, and Al and Mike had these ship captain type hats on. It was just a strange visual, but that has to be what I saw. But I can vividly remember getting getting woken up to go check that out, and just being so unsettled by it, just confusing me even more. Because of all of the touring and the stuff that happened with Endless Summer. I think it was in the end of 74, maybe it was the end of 75. Rolling Stone voted them the band of the year.
Oh.
Yeah, so this,
Yeah,
I mean, this really is,
like you said, they're going legendary.
Yeah, yeah, and that was without any new music released.
Yeah,
even.
that's so
They're getting
crazy.
vote as the, yeah, I think that I have to look up whether that was the end of 74 or 75, but March of 75, Ceylon Sailor gets re-released. You remember me telling you they released it after Holland, and it went to 79, and then 2 years later, probably because they thought, hey, we got another shot, maybe we got to throw that out there again, and it went to 49.
Oh wow! And this is just the single.
Yes,
just a single.
Yeah, not Holland. They just put out which Ceylon Sailor was released as a single by itself. Before in 73, but then 2 years later they do it in 75 and it goes to number 49. So at that point it was the highest charting single for Warner Brothers. So that was another wow, got a nice charting single in April. The second of, I've got the songbook here that has the cover on it anyway, that the other cover's up behind you. The second of the Capitol compilations comes out. This is, again, exclusively music from 62 to 65, sans one tune from 1969. And it confused me when I was young anyway, because Capitol owned the rights to it. It was a single called Breakaway, we've talked about.
Yeah.
So it's one tune from 1969 stuck in around here because Capitol owned the rights to it. Right. And it had never been released as anything but a single.
And so what's this book? What
that's a song book that it doesn't have all of the
songs.
Oh,
I see. It has actual like music. Got it.
From Spirit of America. But this went to number 8. Okay, that's and it spent a lot of time on the charts. And my folks didn't get me this one immediately. As a matter of fact, it was a few years before I ever got it, but some family friends had it. And I just, every time we were over at their house, I'd please put that record on. And it fires off with Dance, Dance, Dance. And I thought that was the most magical moment in the world. And the can you hand me that one behind you?
Yeah.
Excuse me. Sorry, folks. We're getting kind of
we're getting proppy here.
Yeah, but it's just the inside of this one
this is the same artist did this one?
Yes, but obviously he didn't do these photos. Right, but I remember being just really captivated by these are photos from them in 73 with photos of them from 66 right underneath it, and so then I'm kind of able to draw. Oh wow, okay, that's Al. That's and then this is a picture of them actually at Gercio's Caribou Studios. Look at Brian. See, doesn't he look happy?
Yeah.
But there is Endless Summer and Spirit of America just because of, I don't know, at the time of my life when they'll forever just be hugely impactful as far as the Beach Boys.
Well, and apparently to the rest of the country as well.
Yeah. So, but a compilation that goes to number 8 based on the first 3 years of their career.
Yeah, that's
so 2 of them, and you wonder why. Well, how come people just only know the surfing stuff?
Yeah, exactly. No, that makes so much more sense now.
In May, so that was April. They'd been planning to do the big tour with Chicago, and this was big news. They called it Beachago. Combine the two groups, and they would both do a set, and then they'd come back at the end and do a bunch of tunes together, and it was like a big celebration. It was a massive stadium tour that went the biggest grossing thing of that year.
Yeah, I'm sure.
It was that those shows are legendary, and just all the stuff that they did with Chicago really propelled them during 75. There's a big connection with them. I remember on my 6th birthday in 75, I got Surfin' USA. Okay, so we were talking about all the compilations and reissues we've talked about the late 60s stuff, but then because these things were so popular, some of the early albums, Capitol finally decided, okay, let's start re-releasing those early albums. And they didn't do all of them, but Mom happened to find Surfing USA in like a Kmart or something like that. And I remember getting that for 6th birthday. But before that, the only reference I had for any of these things was looking at the backs of Beach Boy albums, and they would advertise the other albums and the songs that they had. You could just only wonder what it was, because you couldn't hear them any place. And so, but it's not only were they doing these big compilations, but they were starting to flood the market with just the early albums and everything. All of a sudden, it's just like a a tidal wave comes through of the Beach Boys, where people just have so many opportunities to experience their early stuff.
Right.
In June, they do a show. This is not with Chicago, so it must have been it was in the middle of that tour, I think. But they went to London, Wembley Stadium, and they did a show with the Eagles, and Elton John was on it, and he had just released his album called Captain Fantastic, and he made the mistake of deciding he's going to debut a whole new album that nobody's ever heard. Oh. So he didn't go over as well as he had hoped, but I think the Beach Boys played before him, and it's legendary. Smashed. The Beach Boys just stole the show from everybody. And the reviews were off the charts.
And they're still playing the compilation stuff, right?
They're just getting going.
Yeah, they're not playing the.
They were playing some.
Maybe Sailor Sailor, maybe.
I'm sure I can find the set list for
I'd be curious to see.
It's just weighted more. You're going to hear an In My Room or a Catch a Wave,
right,
whereas you wouldn't have heard that in 72 or 73 maybe, or just a few more of those, Be True to Your School.
Right.
Yeah. It just became that the ratio was more heavily weighted towards, because even up through the late 70s you'd get a few deeper cuts,
right,
definitely. But that Wembley show it's legendary, and then kind of just it's a cherry on top of the whole thing, not the most important thing, I guess. In September, probably the most significant thing for Brian happens in many years, in that Marilyn hires Dr. Landy.
Yeah, and I know this story.
Yeah, so he was Dr. Eugene Landy. I'm not going to go through the whole history, but one of the things he did early on in his career is he was the first manager and claims to have discovered a jazz guitar player named George Benson in Pittsburgh. And that was really interesting for me to find. I found that out a long time ago. But then after that, he got a degree in psychiatry, I think, from the University of Oklahoma, or something like it. But he became a shrink to the stars, and he had worked with several famous people before Brian, the actor Richard Harris, and then Alice Cooper, rock musician, was dealing with people with mental problems and addictions and all this, and had made a name for himself. And so Marilyn hired him, and she didn't hire him for Brian to begin with. She acted as if she was having Brian or Dr. Landy come to see her for appointments. And they kind of kept Brian out of the thing, and they almost made Brian, hey, what's going on here? Hey, and a couple of times he actually did kind of try to come in and say, hey, hey, this is my appointment. You need to, and finally they almost had Brian's, I'd like to see this guy myself. And so they set it up like that.
And it was intentional between the two of them?
Yeah.
Oh,
Dr. Landy and Marilyn set it up to...
Because he probably wouldn't be receptive
probably.
The other way.
I don't know how many times they've tried to get that sort of thing done before, but...
Wow, that's
anyway, he came in and I think he already had this, what he called his 24-hour, I think he pronounced it milieu therapy, where he just gets total control, and he basically has to reparent somebody, or but because Brian was in bad shape at this time. He was known not to bathe for a long time, hardly got out of bed, and diet was horrible, smoking 4 packs of cigarettes a day, drinking cocaine, some heroin, and you just basically had no motivation to do anything, when famously early on in the program, Brian wouldn't get out of bed, so Landy just got a great big bucket of water and dumped it on him in bed, and I guess you're gonna get up now,
Yeah.
But he took over total control, put a lock on the refrigerator.
Wow.
Started monitoring phone calls. It was stuff you kind of look at in retrospect and whoa, that's
a little much.
But it was a big problem back then.
Sure.
And also, he was charging I think $100 an hour back then, and that was going to amount up to tens of thousands of dollars a month. Which would become a problem in the early Landy tenure, and eventually why he would get let go the first time. But he basically cut everything. He tried to get Brian off, and he got some people that he brought in, but also Mike's brother Stan. This is the other brother, not Steve, that's managing,
right?
Who has been a professional basketball player up to this point, playing with the Atlanta Hawks the L.A. Lakers.
Huh.
Believe it
No
or not.
kidding.
And guess who his son is? Kevin Love.
No kidding.
Yeah, so that's Mike's nephew.
Hey, I'm a basketball fan. I love Kevin Love.
Yeah. So
no kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, but he had been I think he let go by the Lakers and wasn't doing for a little while. He did do some pro basketball stuff after this period, but he wasn't for a while. And so, big guy and loved Brian, cousin. He was brought in, and he brought some other people in. We'll talk about that later, to help basically be Brian's keepers, to get him out of bed and get him to exercise, go jog, exercise with him, keep him away from the drugs. They'd catch Brian doing stuff like, he'd go down to the kitchen and make himself instant coffee, dump like a whole jar of instant coffee, and when nobody's looking, and then pour it, and then try to stir it up and drink it before anybody could catch him, just to get the buzz off the caffeine, type of shit. Or one of the things that goes on during this period, I always think about poor Carney, I think is the one that talks about it. But they would ride the school bus, and I know at least happened once where Brian would hide and wait for the school bus to show and get before when the girls were getting off the bus, Brian would get on the bus and ask the bus driver if he could bum cigarettes, and it would embarrass him, and one time
anything to catch that buzz, huh? Some sort of stuff,
the drugs were delivered in the mailbox, and it had all kinds of. They were constantly having to undo his plans, and it just it was definitely it ultimately probably. If Brian didn't get some sort of drastic help at this point, this might have been the end of Brian's story.
Yeah.
Really, to even hear.
That's true.
But that's basically 74 and 75.
That's
right there.
That's it. 70. So then what happens next?
Well,
before we get into it too much.
Yeah. Go. Well, before we get into.
Before we do the episode, like what are we leading up to?
Well,
I guess.
When I get this endless summer thing, and of course I've been looking at other Beach Boy albums, looking at Brian Wilson, Chuck Berry, Brian Wilson. And I think I started doing at 5 what everybody else is doing. Where's Brian Wilson? Which 76 sets up the huge first Brian is back.
Okay.
Because everybody, Surfing USA was released as a single off Endless Summer, and it did amazingly well. And they showed that to Brian. He said, that shocks me. I can't even. That just doesn't even seem real. He couldn't even connect with what was going on. But everybody wanted to realize when they got this, they realized, wow, Brian, where is Brian Wilson? And so the Beach Boys realized that they could, they wanted to bring him back anyway, but they realized that they could capitalize on bringing him back.
Right,
and,
because on the song credits on the album, it's his
where's
name.
this guy?
Where's this guy
Where is
at?
he?
Oh, okay.
Right.
And so then 70. So we covered 74 and 75. Are we covering just what time period are we doing next? Just
76.
Just 70. There's enough. Enough goes on in 76.
For the late 70s. We need to do like what we were doing with the first few albums. I think that's really nice to focus on an album and a year.
And so then what album is
15 Big Ones.
15 Big Ones. So we'll focus on
that's going to be your
that's my homework.
Okay. And it's so odd to juxtapose that from Holland 3 years before that. Wait till you listen to it. You're going, what happened to these guys?
Okay, cool. So this episode is obviously just a little shorter there with no album analysis. I think we're about 15, 20 minutes shorter than we normally are. But that makes sense. We're not, breaking an album down, but we'll get back into that format.
Oh, you know what? I do have one thing in 75, I forgot. They got Brian to, Bruce had left the band in 72.
Yeah.
Well, he did a bunch of stuff when he was away from him. One thing he did was form a record label with his old buddy Terry Melcher, who Brian's friends with too, and they got Brian to get into the studio and do a few things. He wouldn't finish anything, but they got him at least to be, somewhat involved, during this
Contribute
total
a little bit,
reclusive period. So I wanted to point that out that, even in these
but this is Terry and Bruce that brought him into something separate from the Beach Boys?
To just get him in. He wanted to, kind of like the Spring thing, to get him a separate project to motivate him, because he's still, at this point, he's, the Beach Boys are a monster he's created, in some respects, and so I know that Equinox deal was both, hey, it'd be cool to get him in to do something, it'll be good for him too.
And what was the project of that?
They cut a few oldies.
Okay.
And, it was kind of for him to get his feet wet and just working in the studio again.
Got it.
But it all kind of helps to rev up to him actually getting back into the studio with 15 Big Ones and everything. So
okay, awesome. Well, that will do it for this. Pretty much just a historical episode here. We'll get like I said, we'll get back into some analysis next time. And if that's it, then
happy 60th anniversary to the Beach Boys.
Thank you for following. Thank you for listening. We have seen a kind of a bigger uptick. And so we want to welcome all the new listeners and thank you for listening and supporting the podcast. Matthew loves doing this, and I love learning, but we really like that we are able to share it with other people with the same love and interest of the Beach Boys. So thank you very much for that, and we'll see you next time.